Welcome to the Catholic Life Podcast. In this week's episode, we're answering the question, what is love? So, it's a big question. Everyone asks it. Does anybody have an answer? Well, with the help of Sunday Scriptures, we're going to go and find out. Because this Sunday Scriptures are pretty awesome. We're going with Jeremiah, with 1 Corinthians, and with the Gospel of Luke. You guessed it, 1 Corinthians 13, that famous scripture that's in every wedding you've ever been to. And it's a good scripture. I've got nothing against this scripture, but I just feel that there's more to it. There's something more that we need to get out of this. Because when Paul wrote this, he wasn't just like, you know what? People are going to need something at weddings. People are going to need something that's nice to read to one another and to put onto little canvases and hang around their house. No, he wasn't thinking that. He was put it there for a purpose. So we'll dive into that and we'll look into all these things because love is fundamental, and we need to keep these fundamental principles in our mind and realize the reality of them. One of which I would like to bring up with you is something you'll definitely have heard before. God is real. Now, I'm not just saying that flippantly, but sometimes I feel that we can forget this. I was listening to a talk with Peter Holmes the other day online about evangelization, and he said this is something that we need to bear in mind. And to be honest, it knocked me off my chair a bit. It's like, of course. God isn't just a particular stance. It's not just an idea. It's not a religion amongst other religions. This is a reality, and we see this in the Old Testament. I think it's in the book of Isaiah mainly, but you see it throughout the development of the Old Testament when the people of Israel are a chosen people. But then there's this concept in that era, in that time, of the God of Israel, the God of Egypt, the God of this country, the God of this country, the God of this tribe, the God of this tribe. And there comes this realization of, oh wow, we left Israel and God's still with us, so maybe there isn't a God of Israel. Maybe there's just a God. And that's exactly what's true. So God is real. And everything that we learn about him through the scriptures is also real. So when Jesus teaches something, we have to take it to heart. Just as much as this table's here, just as much as I'm talking to you, God is real. And bearing that in mind when looking at the scriptures and when talking about your faith, it's just so powerful. God is real, and so is love. And what I want to go into is looking into what exactly love is. So this week we start with Jeremiah. He's a prophet, and he's a really cool prophet. Well, he's a poor prophet. I do feel bad for him. It's like one of those things like, you know, it'd be really cool to be a prophet because you have this really deep connection with God. You know, Moses was given the name of God, which kind of gave him this power with God. He could just call upon God and have a chat with him. That would prove pretty awesome. But as is the case with many people, many of the prophets, and especially with Jeremiah, he went up against a lot of hate. A lot of people were against him, and he had to fight for what is true, and be hated his whole life for it. If you read the book. But in this particular scripture, we're right at the beginning, we're just kind of being introduced to who Jeremiah is. This is like I said, chapter 1, and we're doing verses 4 and 5, which you've probably heard before. I knitted you before you were born. I knitted you in the womb. I knew you. I consecrated you. And it's really beautiful. And I think this is a good showing of love. Is saying that I thought of you. St. Thomas Aquinas tells about love in saying, love is willing the good of the other. It's forgetting about ourselves and putting the other forward. And this is what we see with God in Jeremiah, is that before you were born, I was thinking about you. I had a plan for you. I set you aside. I consecrated you for something good. And there's something really beautiful about that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because then we've got verses 4 and 5, which is saying that I knitted you in the womb, I consecrated you. And he says, I've got like a mission for you. What does he say exactly? He says, I've appointed you as prophet to the nations. Now that still sounds pretty good. Prophet to the nations. It's a pretty good title. But as we get into 17 to 19, it starts taking a bit of a turn, because he starts talking about, now, stand up and be counted. Don't be dismayed, otherwise I will make you dismayed. And it's like, okay, this love thing's taking a bit of a turn. And what it's actually pointing at is kind of saying, it's cool because it's saying, I'm with you, and all I require from you is you to be with me as well, and go on the mission and speak the truth. And in the gospel we'll go into a bit more of that, of like how truth and love are connected so much. This isn't God saying, go to the shop and buy me some milk, or otherwise I won't love you. This is God saying, live a full life, and then you will experience the fullness of life. So we have this all in Jeremiah, and it's a bit scary, and it's a bit crazy, and you can't exactly see how love is going into this. But then obviously we get to the second reading, and we've got 1 Corinthians 12:31 to 13:13. And it's important, that 12:31, because I think that is that's the line to take away from this. There's lots of beautiful and really helpful tips and take other things to take away from it, but that one line which reads, be ambitious for the higher gifts, and I'm going to show you a way that is better than any of them. Now here's the question to ask yourself. Why is Paul writing this? And why is he writing it now? We're 13 chapters into his letter to the Corinthians. So to get the answer to that, you need to read chapters 12 and 14. Get the reading around it. Because at the moment what he's doing is he's talking to the people of Corinth, and this is something to always bear in mind when looking at the letters. Paul isn't writing, because it's a living scripture, yes, he's writing to you, but he's writing to a people at a time. So like a fun fact, the first line of that, what love is like, if I have all the language of angels and eloquence of heaven, but no love, I'm like a clanging cymbal or a gong. Now, really cool, that was a reference for the Corinthians. They're famous for their bronze work in making gongs and cymbals. So when he's saying that, he's like, y'all know what I'm talking about. He's saying, clashing cymbals and gongs, not necessarily the nicest thing. They've got their time and place, but if without love, no matter how eloquent you are, it's just this sound. And so they would have got that. So that's something that's just a nice little tidbit to take away when looking into these scriptures. But going back to be ambitious for the higher gifts, and I am going to show you a way that is better than any of them. Paul is talking to people of Corinth about the spiritual gifts. Now this is a very sophisticated society. They're intelligent people, and they've fallen for a trap that all humanity falls for. We do it today. It's been happening throughout human history. We've been distracted by lesser things. And in this case, it's the spiritual gifts. Now, what I want to point out here is something, because we have these gifts now today. You've heard about people praying in tongues, getting words of knowledge. You often see it in Pentecostal circles and charismatic circles. And they are good. They are good things. But sometimes, and in this case with the Corinthians, the people have been distracted by them. And whereas these things are the higher gifts, because it's, an overflow of prayer, it's the Spirit praying through us, and that's just amazing. It's not the gift. And if you're looking to pray in tongues, but you're not looking to, engage with God, who is love, you're missing this crucial part. And so what Paul does in this is actually doing in this little piece is he's dissecting these gifts. He's pulling them apart with love. Now, when I say with love, I don't mean he's doing it, tenderly and gently and caring. Of course, he's doing those things, but what I mean is he's got the Judeo-Christian understanding of what love is as a backdrop. So what is that understanding? I have some notes, and I'm going to read from them right now. So the Judeo-Christian understanding of love is love is a generous, responsive, active, self-giving love which is modelled on God himself. Now, let's think about this. It's easy to be dramatic here and say, what is love? Love is enfleshed and is hanging on the cross. But love is also, because we're in Luke's Gospel, remember when Jesus was obedient to his parents. The God of the universe, who was right where he needed to be, talking to the people in the temple, when his mum said, let's go, he left. So, love is being obedient. It's speaking the truth. And it's sacrificing yourself, being vulnerable to absolutely everybody. And so it's a big, tough thing. It's a real tough thing. So he's taking this concept of love and he's throwing all the spiritual gifts up against them so that we can see that it's not the gifts that are the gifts. It's love that's the gift. And if you're using the gifts without love, they ain't gifts. They're just gongs and just noise and they're nothing. Which brings us on to the gospel. Gospel according to Luke, chapter 4, 21 to 30. Now this is one of those famous scenes where, you've heard the line when Jesus says there's no prophets that are accepted in their own home. Now, again, with this reading, if we just look at it and just read it, we could get a very different message. Because here, it sounds like Jesus is chastising these people, saying, you're not good enough. You need to be better. And where he is saying that, in a sense, what he's doing is he's being a representative of another aspect of love. He's being that daring, courageous truth that you can't not say it. Because, and it's beautiful because I love the reaction of the people. He's just preached, and everybody's heard about who Jesus is by now. He's done a few miracles, healed a few people, and they see him come home and they're like, I know who you are. I grew up with you. You're Joseph's son. I can get something out of this. And it's like, yes, oh, very good, great preaching, fantastic. And then Jesus prophesied in the real true sense of the meaning of prophecy, which isn't telling the future, but interpreting the current moment. And in this moment, he noticed that they're not praising me because they were listening. They're praising me because they want something from me. And then he tells them what they're thinking. It's like, oh, he's thinking, oh, they're going to heal us. Oh, he's thinking, let's do some miracles. We heard what happened in Capernaum. He's thinking, they're thinking all these things like, yes, we can get something out of Jesus. But Jesus knows more. And he deals with them thusly, and he says to them, no, look at Elisha and Elijah. These are the gifts you've got. These prophets. Look at Jeremiah. Look at Moses. All the same stories. They were never accepted in their own town, but they went outside. Why? Because they were in search of people that wanted love, that wanted God in their lives, and recognized God in these prophets. And so what we need to be is seekers of love and defenders of love. So in the first reading we had Jeremiah. We had an example of God choosing us and then sending us forth. In the second reading we had Paul using that reading to explain to us that love isn't just this fluffy thing. In fact, it is the mark by which we should judge everything. The mark by which we should use to make decisions before we act, before we buy that car, before we take on that job. But also, we shouldn't hinder ourselves. Aim for the higher things and bring love, and love will make it better. And then in the gospel, we see love made flesh, as he bears the truth plainly and firmly, leaving himself vulnerable to attack from those around him. Standing firm and unwaveringly, this is true love, in all its ugly beauty. Not to chastise per se, but to speak the truth in order to free others. Free them from the bonds of their own sin, in this case pride, but we all have them, gluttony, lust, etc., etc. So as we read these scriptures, as we go to Mass this Sunday, think, what is love? And remember that as St. John teaches us, God is love. Tune in next week and see what we've got. God bless.